The Nevada desert burned red under the dying sun. The highway stretched flat and endless, and the old gas station looked like the kind of place forgotten by time and left to rot in peace. A rusted Coca-Cola sign creaked above the entrance. The fuel pumps were old analog models retrofitted with digital displays that blinked weakly under layers of dust. Beyond the road, nothing but dry land, black rock, and miles of silence. Then the silence broke. The deep thunder of a Harley-Davidson rolled off the highway and into the station lot. The bike was old, not vintage clean, not collector polished. Old in the way real machines got old. Scratched chrome, faded black paint, a long scar along the right saddlebag. The kind of bike that had crossed states, deserts, winters, funerals, wars, and never once asked permission. The rider killed the engine and let the silence settle again. He was in his 70s, tall, even with age bending his shoulders a little, his silver beard thick and wind-cut, tied leather gloves creaking as he pulled them off one finger at a time. His denim vest was plain, no patches, no rocker, no chapter insignia. Just a weathered old man in boots and faded jeans. Invisible. That was exactly how he liked it. His name was Elias Mercer, though almost nobody in the modern club world had heard that name spoken aloud in years. To most younger patched riders across Nevada and Arizona, he was only a rumor. A story old men told after midnight. A ghost title. A founder who supposedly disappeared decades ago. Some said he died in prison. Some said in Mexico. Some said he never existed at all. Elias stepped off the bike slowly and started fueling it, his eyes half on the road, half on the reflection in the pump glass. Always watching, always measuring. Old habits. At 72, habit was stronger than muscle. The pump clicked past $10, then $20, then $30. That was when the other engines arrived. 6 motorcycles, newer Harleys, loud pipes. Aggressive tuning, all chrome and ego. They tore into the station lot in formation, tires crunching gravel hard enough to make a statement. The lead rider swung off first, broad shoulders, heavy beard, 40s. A fresh leather cut carrying full Hells Angels Nevada Desert chapter colors. Top rocker, Death's Head. Bottom rocker. And on the side patch, Vice President. His name was Mason Crow. Everything about him radiated the kind of confidence men built when nobody stronger had corrected them in a long time. He looked at Elias's bike first, then at Elias, then smiled. Not friendly. The kind of smile men wear before humiliation. "Well, look what we got here," Mason said loud enough for all 6 riders to hear. "Somebody's grandpa got lost on his way to a retirement home." The younger bikers laughed instantly. One of them circled Elias's Road King slowly. "Damn," another said. "This thing belongs in a museum." Elias kept pumping gas, didn't look up, didn't answer. That made it worse. Men like Mason hated being ignored. Mason walked closer, boots dragging over oil-stained concrete. "Hey, old-timer." Nothing. The numbers on the pump kept rising. "Talking to you." Still nothing. The younger riders spread out in a loose semicircle behind Mason, enjoying the theater. One of them filmed with his phone. Another lit a cigarette and leaned against the air machine. Mason stepped directly into Elias's path as soon as the old man replaced the nozzle. The fuel pump clicked silent. The desert seemed to pause with it. Mason looked him dead in the face. "You deaf?" Elias slowly raised his eyes. Gray, cold. The kind of eyes that didn't react because they'd already seen worse than anything in front of them. For the first time, Mason's grin flickered. Just for half a second. Then his pride shoved him forward. "This station's chapter territory," Mason said. "You don't fuel here unless you know who owns the road." Elias screwed the gas cap back on carefully. His voice, when it came, was low and rough. "Road doesn't belong to boys." The younger riders burst out laughing. Mason's face hardened. "Boys?" He took one step closer. "I'm the vice president of this chapter." Elias gave the bike seat one absent-minded pat, like checking the leather. "Then act like it." That hit. The laughter behind Mason died instantly. Disrespect in front of subordinates was a poison men like him couldn't swallow. Mason grabbed Elias by the shoulder, hard. A younger rider whistled. Another muttered, "Oh, he's done." But Elias didn't tense, didn't flinch, didn't even glance down at the hand, just looked Mason in the eye. "Take your hand off me." Quiet, simple, certain. Mason smirked. "Or what?" Elias said nothing, and that silence made the younger men uneasy in ways they didn't understand. Because confidence from an old man under pressure felt different. It didn't feel like bluff. It felt like memory. Mason shoved him, hard enough to send Elias back 2 steps into the side of his own bike. A couple of the younger bikers laughed louder now, relieved the moment had finally turned physical. One called out, "Guess the fossil still moves." Mason leaned in. "Here's what's going to happen. You're getting back on that rusty piece of junk, and you're riding east until this chapter never sees your face again." Elias straightened. Dust clung to one knee of his jeans. He brushed it off slowly. No anger, no reaction, just patience. Then he looked at every young patched rider one by one, memorizing faces, posture, weakness, loyalty lines. The way a general studies troops before deciding which ones survive. Finally, his gaze landed back on Mason. "You still got time to become a man," Elias said. One of the riders behind Mason actually laughed in disbelief. Mason's expression turned dark. "Get the hell out." Elias mounted his Harley. The engine roared to life with a deeper, older sound than the newer bikes around him. Not louder, heavier, like thunder underground. Mason stepped aside with a mocking bow. "That's right. Ride away." Elias settled his gloves back on, lowered his sunglasses, and, before pulling out, said the one thing none of them would understand yet. "You just disrespected the wrong patch." Then he rode off into the burning horizon. The younger riders laughed. One shouted after him. Another revved his engine in victory. Mason stood there grinning like he'd just established dominance, like the road itself had confirmed his authority. Inside the station, the cashier, an old Marine veteran named Curtis, watched through the dirty glass. He had seen the whole thing, every second, and unlike the young bikers, he recognized what lived behind Elias Mercer's eyes. Curtis had seen those eyes in Fallujah, in men who walked calmly through mortar fire, men too dangerous to perform for emotion. He muttered under his breath, "Idiots." 30 miles west, Elias turned off the highway onto an abandoned frontage road that disappeared into the desert. He killed the engine. Dust settled around him in the red twilight. For a long moment, he sat without moving. Then he pulled a flip phone from his vest. Ancient, scarred, functional. He dialed from memory. 3 rings. A voice answered, still hard, still old, still loyal. "Yeah?" Elias looked back toward the fading highway. "It's time." Silence on the line. Then the voice answered, What happened? Vice President forgot who built his roof. A pause, then a dry chuckle. Mason Crow? Yes. Another pause. Want me to handle it? Elias stared at the darkening sky. Coyotes howled somewhere in the distance. No. His voice turned colder. I'm handling this one myself. The man on the line exhaled. Then I'll call the originals. Do that. And Elias? Yeah. About damn time you came back. The call ended. Elias sat there another moment. His hand rested on the bars, but his mind was 35 years behind. Back when the Nevada Desert chapter was 12 men, 2 broken garages, 1 war veteran's code, and a promise. No drugs, no women trafficking, no coward leadership. Brotherhood above ego. He had built the chapter from scrap metal and discipline, made it feared by rivals and respected by sheriffs, made it rich without poison, made it powerful without losing its code. And then he vanished from public command, by design. Only 5 surviving old-timers still knew the truth. The younger generation had grown up on myth, a hidden founder, a ghost chairman, a phantom vote nobody ever saw. And tonight, that ghost was riding back into his own house, not for revenge, for correction. Because humiliation didn't matter. Disrespect didn't matter. What mattered was what Mason's behavior revealed. The chapter had forgotten the code. And when a club forgot its code, rot had already begun. Elias started the bike again. The old Harley growled beneath him. Ahead, the lights of Reno shimmered in the far distance. Somewhere inside the chapter clubhouse, Mason Crow was probably still laughing with his crew, still telling the story about the old man at the gas station, still enjoying the cheap status boost of public humiliation. He had no idea that by sunrise, every patched member in Nevada would know one truth. The old biker he shoved in the dirt was the man whose signature still sat on every founding charter. And by tomorrow night, Mason wouldn't be deciding chapter business. He'd be standing trial in front of the very man he mocked. Elias twisted the throttle. The Harley launched back onto the highway, this time not as a ghost, not as a rumor, but as the storm returning to claim its own name. The Nevada Desert Chapter Clubhouse stood at the edge of Reno's industrial district, hidden behind a machine shop, a towing yard, and 30 years of earned silence. From the street, it looked like nothing. A dead-end warehouse with faded steel siding. No sign, no logo, no visible cameras. But everything about it was watched. That was how Elias had designed it in 1991. Visibility was weakness. Routine was death. A real clubhouse survived because nobody important ever noticed it. Tonight, though, the parking lot was packed. Chrome gleamed under floodlights. 23 bikes lined the fence, more still arriving. Laughter echoed from inside. Music, bottles. The smug comfort of men who believed the night belonged to them. At the center of it all was Mason Crow, Vice President, 44, broad, loud, and fully intoxicated on his own authority. He stood near the bar, retelling the gas station story for the 3rd time in under an hour. "I'm telling you," Mason said, bourbon glass in hand. "The old bastard actually told me to act like a man." Roars of laughter exploded around the room. One younger patched rider nearly spilled his beer. "The fossil had guts." "No," Mason smirked. "He had dementia." More laughter. The room fed on it. Humiliation stories were social currency, and tonight Mason was cashing in. At the far side of the clubhouse, older members stayed quieter. Rex Danner, 68, scar over one eye, founding road captain. Tommy Vale, 70, former enforcer, knees gone, but mind still sharp. Harlan Pike, 66, treasurer since 1998. 3 men who had been there when the first steel beams went into the walls. 3 men who remembered. None of them laughed. Rex took a slow sip of whiskey and muttered, "You ever ask his name?" Mason glanced over. "Whose?" "The old rider." The younger crowd went silent enough to listen. Mason shrugged. "Why would I?" Rex exchanged a look with Tommy, a bad one. The kind of look old soldiers gave when young men stepped on landmines they hadn't noticed. "You should have," Tommy said quietly. Mason grinned. "What, you know him?" Tommy held the stare for a beat too long, then looked away. No, but the lie hung in the room. Mason ignored it, because arrogance always edited reality. He turned back to the bar, clapped one of the younger prospects on the shoulder and said, "That's what happens when ghosts from the old days forget the world changed." At that exact moment, 40 miles south, Elias Mercer rolled into a small desert diner just off Route 50. The kind of place truckers loved and cops ignored. A neon sign buzzed in the window, "Open all night." One bike was already there, old Harley, shovelhead, black and silver, still immaculate despite age. Its owner sat inside, waiting. Jonah Kane, 74. Former chapter sergeant-at-arms, the only man alive besides Elias who knew every burial secret, every alliance, every backdoor deal that kept the chapter alive through the wars of the 90s. Jonah didn't rise when Elias entered. He just stared over the rim of his coffee mug. "You let him shove you?" Elias slid into the booth. "I let him reveal himself." Jonah gave the smallest nod. "Same thing you did in Tucson in 2003. That ended differently. 3 men disappeared." Elias said nothing. The waitress brought black coffee without asking. She knew them. Everybody old enough in Nevada knew not to ask questions when these two shared a booth. Jonah slid a manila envelope across the table. Elias opened it. Bank statements, club ledgers, property deeds, internal chapter transfers. All current, all ugly. Mason's fingerprints were everywhere. Jonah leaned back. "He's been moving money for 18 months. Elias kept reading. Small amounts, clever enough to avoid notice, but consistent. $1,200 here, $2,400 there. Maintenance invoices, road trip allocations, security cash pools. Total siphoned amount, $146,000. Elias's eyes hardened. "Who's he framing?" Jonah took a slow breath. "Damian Cross." That made Elias look up. Damian was solid, 39, ex-infantry, ran charity rides, never missed funerals, paid hospital bills for brothers' families without announcing it. One of the few younger members Elias had been quietly watching with approval. "Mason wants him out tomorrow night," Jonah continued. "Emergency church vote. Claims Damian's been bleeding chapter funds." Elias studied the forged trail. It was clean. Too clean. Mason had gotten smarter than the gas station performance suggested. This wasn't just ego anymore. This was succession. "He wants presidency." Jonah nodded. "With you gone and half the originals too old to fight him, yes." Elias looked out the diner window at the darkness beyond the highway. This was bigger than disrespect. The gas station humiliation had only confirmed what the numbers now proved. Mason wasn't just loud. He was corrupt. And corrupt men with loyal young followers turned clubs into cartels. That was how legacies died. Jonah's voice lowered. There's more. He pulled another document from inside his jacket. A photo. Warehouse surveillance still. Mason meeting with the Black Vipers MC, a rival outfit running fentanyl through northern Nevada. Elias stared at it. No reaction on the outside. But Jonah knew him well enough to see the shift. The stillness got colder. He's talking distribution? Elias asked. Looks like territorial cooperation. Silence. The diner hum felt louder. Coffee machines, forks, a trucker coughing in the corner. But inside the booth, the air had gone to war. Because the first law of the Nevada Desert chapter had always been absolute. No poison enters through our roads. Not meth, not heroin, not fentanyl. Not under their patch. Elias himself had nearly started a desert war in 1998 to enforce that code. 6 bodies, 2 burned warehouses, 1 truce that lasted 27 years. And now Mason was touching the line. Jonah watched him carefully. What's the play? Elias folded the papers, precise, controlled. Tomorrow night. Public? Very. Jonah almost smiled. About time the boys met their founder. Elias took 1 sip of coffee. Bitter. Perfect. Call the originals. Jonah's eyes narrowed. All of them? All who can still stand. That meant 7. 7 surviving founders, or first-generation patched men. Enough history to swing the room if the reveal hit correctly. Jonah nodded, then asked the real question. You sure you want to come back like this? Elias thought about the gas station, the shove, the laughter, the phones filming. The younger men thinking age meant weakness. No, he said honestly, but the chapter needs correction. Jonah smirked. Same old Elias. No, Elias stood. Older. Less patient. The next evening, the clubhouse was overflowing. 31 patched members, 5 prospects, 3 women in the back office, 1 accused innocent, and 1 vice president preparing his own coronation. Damian Cross sat alone at the far end of the room, jaw tight, hands clasped. He already knew tonight was theater, but theater could still end in exile. Mason stood at the head of the long oak table, wearing authority like it had already been voted permanent. He slapped a folder onto the wood. Brothers, he said, we got rot. The room quieted. Younger members leaned forward. This was what they'd been conditioned to respect. Control, confidence, public judgment. Mason pointed at Damian. 18 months of chapter theft. Murmurs. Damian didn't move. Say it to my face, Damian said calmly. Mason smirked. I just did. He opened the folder dramatically. Financial statements, highlighted transfers, forged signatures, prepared narratives. Every visual cue of guilt. The younger patched writers immediately began nodding, because paperwork felt like truth to men who didn't understand how power forged paperwork. Rex Danner remained silent near the wall. Tommy Vale didn't blink. Harlan Pike kept his face unreadable. They were waiting. Mason turned toward the room. I'm calling for expulsion. A younger member slammed his fist into the table. Strip his patch! Another followed. Vote now! Momentum. Manufactured outrage. Exactly as Mason intended. Then came the knock. 3 slow hits against the steel clubhouse door. The sound cut through the room like a blade. Everyone turned. Mason frowned. We're in church. Another knock, same rhythm, slow, measured, unhurried. Tommy Vale rose from his chair for the first time, his old knees cracked. "I'll get it." Mason started to object, but Tommy was already moving. The room held its breath as the steel door opened, and Elias Mercer stepped inside. Plain denim vest, silver beard, dust still on his boots from the desert road. The exact same old man half the room had heard Mason mock all night. The younger members immediately began laughing. "No way! Gas station grandpa! He followed you home!" Mason's face twisted into disbelief, then delight. "Well, I'll be damned." He stepped forward into the center aisle. "You really got lost." Elias closed the door behind him. The sound echoed through the room, heavy, final. Then he looked at Damien, then the forged paperwork, then Mason, and finally the room. 31 faces, most unfamiliar, too young, too loud, too easy. Exactly what he had feared. Mason spread his arms theatrically. "Brothers, looks like our roadside fossil came to watch church." Laughter again. Phones quietly came out. This was about to become another story, another public humiliation. Mason walked close enough to invade Elias's space. "You got guts showing your face here." Elias looked him dead in the eye. "This house was built with my money." The laughter weakened, just slightly. Mason tilted his head. "What?" Elias took one slow step forward. "This table was cut in my garage." Another. "That wall was welded by my road captain." Another. "And that patch over your heart still rides under rules I wrote." Now the room had changed. The old-timers rose one by one. Rex, Tommy, Harlan. Then 4 more men from the back wall, all standing, all silent, all facing Elias. And for the first time in 20 years, fear entered Mason Crow's eyes. The clubhouse had gone so quiet. The hum of the old refrigeration unit behind the bar sounded like machinery in a bunker. Nobody moved. Nobody laughed. 31 patched men stared at the old rider in the doorway, and 7 old-timers were now standing for him. Not casually, not out of politeness, out of recognition, out of rank, out of memory. Mason Crow's jaw tightened. The first crack in his confidence had appeared. But ego was a stubborn disease. He forced a grin, then laughed once, short, sharp, disbelieving. "What is this?" Mason asked, looking around the room. "Some kind of old man prank?" Nobody answered him. That made it worse, because silence from younger members meant confusion. Silence from older members meant danger. Elias Mercer stepped deeper into the clubhouse, boots slow against the wooden floor. Every step carried the weight of ownership. The walls were covered in 30 years of history, photos, runs, memorial patches, brothers buried under desert stone. And in almost every older photo, somewhere near the edge, there was always one man never fully centered, never positioned like leadership, never obvious, a ghost in plain sight. The younger generation had simply never looked closely enough. Mason turned toward the old-timers. Rex Danner, Tommy Vale, Harlan Pike, all standing like soldiers hearing an old general's boots again. "Sit down," Mason snapped. None of them moved. That was the moment every younger patched rider in the room felt the shift. Authority wasn't in the voice. It was in the obedience. And right now, nobody was obeying Mason. Damian Cross, still seated under false accusation, slowly looked from Elias to the standing originals. Something clicked behind his eyes. He didn't know the whole truth, but he knew one thing instantly. This old man mattered. A lot. Mason stepped directly in front of Elias. Again, just like the gas station. Only this time there were 30 witnesses, and the stakes were a chapter's future. You think walking in here with a couple retirees behind you means something? Elias looked at him without blinking. It means you still have one chance. Mason laughed. The younger members joined him, not because they believed it, because they needed Mason to still be the loudest voice in the room. Chance? Mason said. You don't even have a patch. That landed exactly how Elias expected. He slowly unbuttoned his plain denim vest. Every eye followed the movement. Underneath, black cotton, faded, old. He reached inside the lining and removed something wrapped in oilcloth. Jonah Kane stepped forward from the back wall and took the cloth. Without a word, he unfolded it. A black leather cut, aged, cracked in places, but preserved with reverence. The room stared. On the back, Hell's Angels. Death's Head centered. Bottom rocker, Nevada Desert. And beneath the center patch, stitched in weathered but unmistakable lettering, Founding President. The younger members went dead silent. No one breathed. No one blinked. Because patches didn't lie. Not old ones. Not original cuts. Not founder leather. Mason stared at it like it was physically impossible. This is fake. Jonah Kane smiled for the first time all night. A dangerous smile. No. He handed the cut to Elias. This is history. Elias slid it on. The leather fit perfectly despite the years, like armor returning to the body it was built for. Mason took one step back. Instinct, not choice. Elias turned slowly, letting the room absorb it. Then his voice finally filled the clubhouse. My name is Elias Mercer. A pause, long enough to let it land. I founded this chapter in 1991 with 11 men who believed brotherhood should outlive ego. He looked at the old-timers. They're still here. Rex nodded once. Tommy lowered his head in respect. Harlan placed one hand over his own patch. The younger members began looking around the room, trying to find reality through the reactions of men they had never truly studied before. Mason found his voice again. This proves nothing. Elias almost smiled. Good. Push harder. Make the reveal hurt deeper. He walked to the photo wall. 30 years of framed chapter history. Runs through Arizona, Colorado meets, border charity rides, snow routes through Utah. He stopped at the oldest framed image, 12 men outside a cinder block garage. No polished bikes, no custom cuts, no wealth, just road dust and discipline. Elias lifted the frame off the wall and handed it to the nearest young patched rider. Read the bottom. The rider's eyes moved to the brass plate. His face changed instantly, because the engraved text read, Founding Nevada Desert Chapter, President Elias Mercer. He passed it to another, then another. Like evidence moving through a jury, the room's energy collapsed into disbelief. Mason's face darkened. This wasn't supposed to happen. The room was supposed to be his. Damian was supposed to be expelled. The chapter was supposed to move one step closer to his presidency. Instead, the ghost had walked through the front door wearing proof. Mason shifted tactics. Aggression, his favorite refuge. So what? He snapped. You founded it, 30 years ago. That doesn't mean you still run it. A dangerous sentence, because it revealed too much. Ambition, entitlement, claim. Elias turned back toward him. You've been moving chapter money. Mason's pupils tightened, small but visible. The younger members caught it. Not the accusation, the reaction. Elias walked to the long oak table, the same one Mason had slapped fake evidence onto 10 minutes earlier. He placed Jonah's envelope beside Mason's folder, slowly opened it, spread out the ledgers, original treasury copies. Harlan Pike stepped forward. The old treasurer adjusted his glasses. These are real. His voice was flat, final. He turned pages, invoice numbers, maintenance cash pools, fuel reimbursements, equipment allocations, then the transfers, the false shell vendors, the siphoned cash. $146,000. Every trail led back to authorizations Mason controlled. The room erupted into noise. What the hell? No way. That's impossible. Mason slammed his fist into the table. This is planted. Elias never raised his voice. Then explain the Black Vipers meeting. Jonah tossed the surveillance photo onto the wood. Mason froze. The younger patched members nearest the table saw it first, then the rest surged closer. A warehouse lot. Black Viper's cuts. Mason, clearly visible, handing over a ledger binder. Now the room shifted from confusion to betrayal. That was the one line every man in the chapter understood. Rival MC cooperation without church vote, especially Vipers. Especially poison runners. Damian Cross rose from his chair, slowly, calmly. His expression wasn't rage, it was disappointment, the kind that cut deeper. You framed me. Mason turned toward him. For the first time all night, his confidence looked unstable. Damian, listen. No. Damian stepped closer. I vouched for you 3 years ago when the Tucson boys said you were too hungry for rank. That line hit hard because multiple younger members had also vouched for Mason over the years. Now they were recalculating every decision, every vote, every public humiliation, every speech. Mason looked around the room. He saw it happening, support peeling away, not all at once, but enough. Fear made him lash out. He pointed at Elias. He disappeared. The room quieted again. Mason leaned into it. He vanished for years. Let the chapter run blind. Let us carry the weight while he played ghost. And now he walks in and expects us to kneel? Some of the younger members hesitated. Good argument. Powerful argument. Because abandonment was real. Elias nodded slowly. That part is true. The room stilled. Honesty disarmed better than dominance. I stepped away after my wife died. That changed the temperature instantly. No performance, no drama, just truth. 26 years she rode beside me. When cancer took her, I let grief become absence. He looked around the room. That was my failure. Even Mason didn't interrupt, because authenticity made lies sound cheap. Elias continued, but grief never gave you the right to poison this house. He placed one weathered hand flat on the oak table. My absence explains your opportunity. Then his eyes locked on Mason. It does not excuse your betrayal. Mason's breathing had changed, faster, harder. He looked trapped now, because the room had become a courtroom, and Elias had already taken control of the jury. Damian stepped beside Elias, then Rex, then Tommy, then Jonah. Then 3 more patched riders from the younger generation. Not all old, not all original, but enough. Visible momentum. Mason saw it. The room slipping. His chapter, his future, his title. Gone. He reached inside his cut. Fast. Too fast. Half the room moved on instinct. Hands to belts, boots scraping wood. And Elias didn't move at all, because he already knew what came next. Mason pulled steel, a handgun, black matte, compact. The room exploded, shouting, chairs slammed backward, prospects ducked. 3 patched riders moved to flank. Jonah's hand disappeared under his own cut. Damien squared his stance. But Elias stayed perfectly still. Mason aimed center mass at Elias. His voice cracked with rage. "You should have stayed dead." No one in the room breathed. The next 3 seconds would decide whether this ended as church or blood. The barrel of Mason Crow's pistol pointed straight at Elias Mercer's chest. No one moved. Not because they were frozen, because every patched man in that clubhouse understood what this moment meant. This was no longer politics, no longer succession, no longer an internal vote. This was a man deciding whether his pride mattered more than the patch on his back. Mason's hand trembled, not from fear, from collapse. The kind that happens when a man watches the identity he built for years disintegrate in less than 10 minutes. His breathing was ragged, his face flushed dark. The younger riders nearest the wall had already stepped away from him. That alone said everything. Loyalty vanished fastest when guns appeared inside church. Elias stood exactly where he was. No flinch, no shift, no defensive posture. Just those gray eyes fixed on Mason with the same calm he had worn at the gas station. That calm was more terrifying now, because the room finally understood what it was. Not passivity, not weakness, experience. Elias had already survived moments far worse than a desperate vice president with shaking hands. "Mason," Elias said quietly, "you're making your last bad decision." Mason's voice cracked. "You disappeared." The gun wavered. "You let this place become mine." "No," Elias replied. The word hit like iron. "I let this place reveal who deserved it." That cut deeper than any insult, because every younger patched rider in the room knew exactly what Mason had spent years trying to become. Not just vice president. Legacy. He wanted the chapter to say his name the way the originals said Mercer. He wanted to be remembered. Instead, he was standing in front of 31 men holding a gun like a coward. Jonah Kane's hand was still under his cut, ready. So was Rex Danner's. Damian Cross stood 2 steps to Elias's left, body angled, waiting for an opening. But Elias subtly lifted one finger, a signal only the old guard recognized. "Stand down." Not yet. Mason swallowed hard. "You don't get to come back and erase everything I built." Elias's voice remained level. "What did you build?" A pause. Then he answered his own question. "Debt." 1 step forward. False loyalty. Another. Poison alliances. Another. A leadership model built on humiliation. The room felt colder with every word. Mason's jaw tightened. "You think these men respect you?" Elias turned his gaze toward the younger patched riders. No accusation, just truth. They respected volume because they were never shown discipline. That landed hard, because several younger members lowered their eyes, not in shame, in realization. Mason saw it, the room turning. The gun was the only leverage he had left. So he did what weak leaders always do. He escalated. "Everyone back up!" he shouted. The pistol swung toward Damien, then Jonah, then back to Elias. "Any one of you moves, I put one in him." That was the mistake, not the gun, the threat. Because threatening the founder inside church crossed from desperation into sacrilege. Even the youngest patched men understood that instinctively. Elias finally moved. One slow step. Mason barked, "Stop!" Elias didn't. Another step. Mason's finger tightened visibly on the trigger. The room held its breath. Then Elias spoke the sentence that split the room open. "You know why I let you shove me yesterday?" Mason blinked. The question broke his rhythm. "What?" "Because I needed to know if your disrespect was performance," another step, "or character." The gun trembled harder now. "It's both." Mason's voice was smaller, angrier because it was smaller. Elias stopped 6 feet away. Perfect range, perfect read. Old combat instincts measuring angles, reaction time, dominant hand weakness, weight distribution. He had already solved the problem. He was simply waiting for the moment Mason mentally broke. And it came, not with the gun, with the eyes. Mason looked around the room. No support, no brother stepping beside him, no one matching his aggression. Even the younger riders who once laughed at the gas station now looked horrified. He wasn't holding power anymore. He was holding evidence. That realization crushed him. His shoulders dipped, a fraction, but enough. Elias moved, fast, so fast half the younger riders didn't even process what happened. One hand slapped the barrel sideways. The shot fired. The sound detonated through the clubhouse. Glass shattered behind the bar. Before Mason could react, Elias's other hand trapped the wrist, twisted hard, and drove his elbow directly into Mason's sternum. Air exploded from Mason's lungs. The gun hit the floor. Jonah kicked it away instantly. Damien and Rex were on Mason a second later, driving him face first into the oak table. The whole thing lasted less than 2 seconds. Silence followed. Heavy. Violent. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the room. Mason coughed against the wood, trying to breathe. Elias stepped back, his own breathing steady. No adrenaline visible. No triumph. Just correction. That scared the younger riders more than violence would have, because he had handled a gun disarm like muscle memory, like he'd done it before, many times. Jonah held the pistol up by the slide. "Gun in church!" His voice carried like a sentence. Automatic offense. No vote needed in old chapter law. But Elias raised a hand. "Not yet." Damien looked up sharply. Even Rex frowned. Mercy. Again. Mason coughed blood into the crook of his arm and slowly lifted his head. Humiliation had finally found him. Not public mockery. True humiliation. The kind that stripped illusions. He looked around the room and saw what Elias wanted him to see. No one was with him. Not one man. Not even the prospects. His little empire had vanished in the time it took a gunshot to echo. Elias stepped closer. "You still have one road left." Mason's voice was broken now. "What?" "Truth." Mason laughed once, a bitter, shattered sound. "You think truth saves me?" "No." Elias's face hardened. "It saves the chapter." That line hit the room harder than the gunshot, because suddenly this wasn't about Mason anymore. It was about whether the house survived the rot. Damien straightened, still holding Mason down. "Say it." Mason closed his eyes. For the first time, the swagger was gone. No audience left to perform for. No authority left to protect. Just consequences. I moved the money. The words barely came out, but they were enough. Murmurs exploded across the room. One younger patched rider slammed his fist into the wall. Another cursed under his breath. Elias remained still. All of it. Mason swallowed. Started with fuel reimbursements. He coughed again. Then charity run overflow. Harlan Pike's face darkened. Son of a bitch. Mason kept talking, because once the truth cracked open, it came fast. I met with the Black Vipers. Gasps. Open outrage now. The room's temperature changed from disbelief to fury. They offered territory percentages if I softened chapter enforcement. Damien nearly drove him back into the table. You were gonna poison our roads? Mason shut his eyes tighter. Yes. That one word made multiple younger riders step away from him physically, like corruption had become contagious. Elias's expression didn't change, but inside the chapter's future had just forked. This was no longer about one man's ambition. It was about structural decay, recruitment culture, leadership gaps, an entire generation trained to mistake loudness for strength. Elias looked at the room, at the faces that would define the next 20 years. This is what weak leadership breeds. Nobody argued, because the evidence was breathing in front of them. Mason slowly lifted his head again. His voice cracked into something raw. I thought I could become bigger than the patch. Elias nodded once. That's why you were never ready to wear it. Long silence. Then Damien asked the question everyone was waiting for. What now, President? The title hit the room like thunder. First time spoken aloud in decades, and every patched man heard it. Not myth, not rumor. Authority. Real. Present. Elias looked at Mason, then at the room, then at the bullet hole in the far wall. Now, he said quietly, we rebuild what arrogance almost destroyed. And for the first time in 30 years, every patched rider in the Nevada Desert chapter stood at attention for a man they had only known as legend. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the clubhouse like a warning the walls would remember. No one sat. No one reached for another drink. The room had transformed from a place of ego and noise into something older, a chamber of consequence. Mason Crow remained pinned against the oak table, chest heaving, blood at the corner of his mouth, the illusion of leadership stripped so completely that he looked smaller than anyone in that room had ever seen him. Not physically, spiritually. The younger patched riders kept their distance now. Hours earlier they had laughed with him, backed his voice, mirrored his confidence. Now the same men stared at him like they were looking at roadkill. Because the gun had changed everything. Not just the offense, the psychology. A man willing to draw steel in church had already admitted he had no trust left in his own authority. Elias Mercer stood at the head of the table, one hand resting on the old wood his younger self had once built in a 2-car garage. The founder's cut sat heavy across his shoulders. No longer myth, no longer ghost. And somehow that made the room calmer. Authority, when real, didn't need volume. It reduced chaos simply by existing. Damian Cross released Mason first and stepped back. Rex and Jonah followed. No one needed to restrain him anymore. Where was he going to go? The room itself had become a wall. Mason slowly straightened. Every eye stayed on him. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and looked around the clubhouse, at the old-timers, at the younger patched men, at the prospects who had worshipped him, at Damien, the man he had nearly buried with lies. and finally at Elias. His voice, when it came, had none of its old force. What happens to me? A simple question. But inside the Nevada Desert chapter, that question had layers. Patch, rank, brotherhood, exile, police, rival MC retaliation. Every man in the room understood this wasn't just punishment. It was precedent. How Elias handled Mason would define the entire culture reset. Elias looked at the bullet hole in the far wall, then at Mason. What should happen? That landed harder than a direct sentence, because it forced Mason to confront the code instead of hiding behind fear. Mason swallowed. He looked at the floor for a long moment, then said it. I should lose the patch. Murmurs moved through the room. Some expected it, some wanted worse. But Elias didn't answer yet. Instead, he turned toward the younger patched members, especially the loudest among them. Tyler Boone, 32, fast rider, loyal to Mason for 2 years. Tyler stiffened. Yes, President? You laughed at the gas station. Tyler's face changed color instantly. He nodded. Yes. Why? Tyler hesitated, because the real answer sounded childish even in his own head. Because Mason led the room. Elias nodded. No anger, only diagnosis. That's the disease. Silence. Every younger rider in the room felt that line, because many of them had followed momentum instead of principle. Not maliciously, passively, which was worse in a brotherhood. Elias turned slowly, addressing all of them now. A chapter dies long before bullets hit it. He pointed toward Mason. It dies when men stop thinking and start echoing. No one moved. No one challenged it, because they had all just watched exactly how echo culture almost turned the chapter into a fentanyl route. Damien stepped forward. What's the ruling? Elias finally looked at Mason again. You stole from your brothers. Mason lowered his head. You framed a loyal patched member. Another nod. You negotiated with poison traffickers. A harder swallow. You pulled a gun in church. Mason closed his eyes. Everyone in the room knew those combined offenses usually ended one way. Expulsion. Patch stripped, colors burned, name buried. Sometimes worse. Elias let the silence stretch until the weight of it settled into every younger member's spine. Then he said the one thing nobody expected. You're not losing the patch. The room erupted, voices instantly. What? No way. That's insane. Even Jonah Kane turned sharply. Damien stared in disbelief. Mason himself looked genuinely confused. Elias raised one hand. The room obeyed instantly. That alone proved how quickly real authority restored structure. You are losing rank. The room quieted. Elias stepped closer to Mason. Slow. Final. As of this moment, you are stripped of vice presidency. Mason nodded once. No protest. Good. Humility had finally entered. Elias continued. You repay every dollar. Another nod. You publicly clear Damien's name at the next statewide run. Mason's jaw tightened. Humiliation. Necessary. Yes. You spend 12 months under direct road supervision. That made some younger riders exchange looks. Road supervision was brutal. No solo decisions, no chapter finances, no church influence. Every ride, every vote, every move monitored. essentially probation for a patched officer. Then came the real sentence. And you spend 1 year rebuilding what you tried to poison. Mason looked up. What does that mean? Elias's voice dropped colder. Veteran hospital runs. The room went silent. Cancer transport support. Another pause. Funeral escort detail. The silence deepened, because every man in that room understood what Elias had just done. He was forcing Mason to relearn what service felt like, to replace ego with burden, to earn humility through duty, not through speeches, through miles. Mason's eyes shifted. Something there cracked deeper. This time not fear. Regret. Real regret. Because the founder had chosen restoration over destruction. And that kind of mercy was harder to carry than punishment. Mason nodded slowly. I'll do it. Elias studied him for a beat. You will. Then he turned toward Damien. Stand up here. Damien stepped beside him. The room already knew what was coming, but hearing it mattered. Damien Cross, Elias said, loud enough for every patched rider to hear. All accusations against you are erased. Your record stands clean. Your loyalty stands proven. Damien gave one sharp nod. Emotion stayed behind discipline, but everyone could feel what it meant. The room answered with fists to tables, boots to floor. Respect. Restoration. Then Elias made the bigger move. Effective immediately, Damien takes interim vice president authority. This time the room responded faster. Agreement. No confusion. No split. Even several of Mason's former supporters nodded, because competence had just defeated charisma. Damien looked stunned. President? You kept your integrity under isolation, Elias said. That's leadership. No speech followed. It didn't need one. Truth already carried enough force. Then the steel clubhouse door opened. Heads turned. A woman stepped inside, late 30s, dark hair tied back, leather riding jacket, sharp eyes. Everyone in the room recognized her. Rachel Crow, Mason's ex-wife, former chapter medic, the woman who left him 2 years earlier when his obsession with rank turned every conversation into control. Mason froze. What are you doing here? Rachel looked straight at Elias first, then the bullet hole, then Mason's blood, then the room. I heard there was a gun pulled in church. No one spoke. She stepped closer to Mason, and when she looked at him, there was no hatred. Just sadness. You became exactly what I warned you about. That hit harder than any fist, because it came from the only person in the room who had known him before ambition. Mason couldn't hold her gaze. Rachel's voice softened. I didn't leave because of the club. Mason looked up. She continued, I left because rank became your whole personality. The younger riders listened closely now. This was no longer chapter politics. This was the anatomy of corruption. Elias allowed it, because sometimes truth needed more than hierarchy. It needed witnesses. Rachel stepped back, then looked at Elias. You going to save him? Elias answered honestly. No. A beat. I'm giving him a road. That line settled into Mason's face, because suddenly his punishment felt bigger. He wasn't being destroyed. He was being forced to decide who he would become. Again. Rachel nodded once, then turned and left without another word. The steel door shut behind her. The sound echoed like a chapter closing. Mason remained still for several seconds, then finally looked at Elias. Why? The The same question broken men always asked Mercy. Elias answered with the only truth that mattered. Because I failed this chapter too. The room looked up. That confession mattered. Founder vulnerability restored legitimacy faster than dominance ever could. I left the younger generation without structure, Elias continued. That gave ambition room to mutate. He looked directly at Mason. You are your choices, but this room also reflects my absence. That honesty changed everything, because now the room wasn't watching a perfect legend. They were watching accountable leadership. And accountable leadership was impossible to rebel against honestly. Elias took off his gloves slowly, set them on the oak table. Tomorrow morning, 0600. He looked around the room. Every patched rider here meets at St. Mary's Veteran Oncology Wing. Confused silence, then understanding. Cancer transport support. Margaret, his wife. This was where the rebuild started. Not with retaliation, not with speeches, with service. Anyone who doesn't show, Elias said, doesn't understand this patch. No one argued, because for the first time in years, the chapter knew exactly what kind of house they belonged to. Not a gang, not a cartel, a brotherhood with memory. And Elias Mercer intended to rebuild it, mile by mile. The morning over Reno broke cold and silver, a hard desert dawn, the kind that made chrome look blue and old scars ache before coffee. By 5:42, the parking lot outside St. Mary's Veteran Oncology Wing was already filling with motorcycles, one by one, then in clusters, then in disciplined rows. Harleys, Dynas, Road Kings, old shovelheads from the original generation, even two younger, sportier builds from the newer guys who had never once stepped foot inside a hospital wing before. By 5:58, every patched rider from the Nevada Desert chapter was there. 31 men. No excuses, no missing faces. Even Mason, especially Mason. He stood near the back beside his bike, stripped now of the vice president's side rocker, the empty stitching line still visible on his cut like a scar that hadn't healed. No one mocked him. No one comforted him. That was worse. Real consequences were quiet. Elias Mercer arrived last, not as theater, as habit. A leader always entered after the machine was already running. His old Harley rolled into the lot with that deep iron rumble that somehow made every younger rider stand a little straighter. He killed the engine and took in the line. Good. Everyone had shown. Even Tyler Boone, who had laughed the loudest at the gas station. Even the younger prospects who had clearly never been this close to sickness, loss, or the side of service that didn't involve leather and engines. Elias stepped off the bike slowly. No speech at first. He just looked at the hospital entrance. Glass doors, automatic open. People inside already moving. Nurses, orderlies, families who hadn't slept. This was where brotherhood actually mattered. Not in bars, not in church votes, in corridors that smelled like bleach and fear. Damian Cross approached, now wearing the temporary VP rocker stitched overnight by Rachel herself. A detail the room would eventually hear about, and when they did, it would matter. Everything's set, Damian said quietly. Elias nodded. How many transports? 7 veterans, 3 chemo discharges, 2 final stage home escorts. The younger patched riders nearby shifted uneasily. Final stage meant death was close. Good. Let them feel it. Let them understand what duty really looked like. Elias finally turned to the chapter, his voice cut clean through the cold morning air. Today you remember why this patch exists. No one spoke. No one moved. Not for bars, not for fear, Not for rank. His eyes swept the line. For burden. That landed hard, especially on the younger generation, because burden wasn't sexy. It didn't get applause. It built character in silence. Elias continued. Every one of these men inside wore uniforms before they ever saw a cut. Some buried brothers overseas. Some buried sons. Some are about to lose the last fight they've got. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped. My wife died in a wing like this. That changed the air instantly. Even Mason looked up, because this wasn't abstract anymore. This was origin. This was why the founder had chosen service as correction. She spent 11 months in a bed 2 floors above us, and the only men who made her smile near the end, he looked at the line of bikes, were riders. No one breathed. No one dared break the stillness. Today, we carry that forward. He nodded toward the entrance. Move. The chapter split into teams. Hospital staff had clearly been briefed. Nurses guided them. Orderlies pointed rooms. Families stared in disbelief as 31 patched bikers moved through the oncology wing with total silence and respect. No swagger, no loud jokes, no performance. Just service. Tyler Boone was assigned to Mr. Franklin Wade, a 79-year-old Korean War veteran too weak to lift his own overnight bag. Tyler took the bag without a word, walked beside the wheelchair all the way to the curb, helped load oxygen tanks into the family SUV, held the door for Franklin's daughter. The old man reached out with trembling fingers and gripped Tyler's wrist. Marine? Tyler blinked. No, sir. The old veteran smiled weakly. Still carry yourself like one. That hit Tyler harder than any church reprimand could have. Across the lot, Mason was assigned the hardest route, a final stage transport. Walter Briggs, 68, lung cancer. Former Army engineer, no surviving family. Hospice care across town. One-way ride. Walter insisted on riding in the chapter's support van instead of the hospital ambulance, said he wanted to hear engines. Damien put Mason in the passenger seat beside him. No speeches, no symbolic punishment, just proximity to mortality. The van pulled away with 4 bikes escorting. Mason sat in silence for the first 10 minutes. Walter coughed blood into a cloth once, then stared out the window at the road. You look like a man who lost something. Mason glanced over. The old veteran's eyes were still sharp despite the oxygen line. Mason answered before he thought. I lost who I was. Walter gave the faintest smile. That's easier to find than people think. Silence again. Then Walter asked, You ride for respect? Mason stared at the highway. I used to. Walter's breathing crackled. Wrong reason. Another cough. I buried men in Fallujah who never once cared how people looked at them, only what they carried. The words sat heavy in the van. Mason said nothing, because for the first time in years, there was no defense left inside him, only listening. At the hospital, Elias walked the upper corridor alone. He knew the wing too well. The same hallways, same hard chairs, same smell of antiseptic and waiting. Room 214, Margaret's room, now occupied by another patient. He stood outside it for a long moment. No ghosts, no breakdown, just memory. Sometimes grief changed shape. Today it felt less like drowning and more like direction. A nurse approached softly. Mr. Mercer? He turned. Middle-aged, kind face, recognition. You were here years ago. Elias nodded. My wife. The nurse smiled sadly. She loved the motorcycles. That caught him off guard. The smallest thing. But memory in someone else's voice had weight. She said the engines sounded like freedom. Elias almost smiled. That sounds like her. The nurse glanced down toward the lobby windows where rows of Harleys stood in perfect discipline. She'd be proud today. Elias looked at the bikes, then the men moving patients, the younger generation carrying oxygen tanks, Mason helping hospice paperwork, Tyler comforting a veteran's wife, Damien organizing routes. Maybe she would. His phone vibrated. Jonah Kane. Elias answered immediately. What? Jonah's voice was hard. Police. The word sharpened everything. Talk. Reno PD got an anonymous report about the gun in church. Of course. Probably one of the prospects. Maybe someone trying to leverage chaos. Maybe Mason's enemies inside the chapter. Either way, it was pressure. Jonah continued. They're asking questions about chapter finances, too. Elias's eyes narrowed. That part mattered more. The gun incident alone was survivable. The finances, after Black Viper evidence, could destabilize statewide alliances. Who's leading? Detective Lena Voss. Elias knew the name. Organized Crime Division. 40. Smart. Not corrupt. Dangerously patient. The kind of cop who didn't bluff. When? She wants to meet this afternoon. Elias looked through the hospital glass at his chapter working, rebuilding, learning, bleeding arrogance out through service. And now law enforcement wanted to pull on the same thread. Good. Let them. Because rot hidden from police became leverage later. Truth now was better than blackmail later. I'll meet her. Jonah exhaled. You sure? Elias's gaze shifted to Mason, helping Walter's hospice nurse sign transfer forms. Yes. A pause, then colder. If the chapter's going to survive another 30 years, we stop hiding behind ghosts. By 1400, Elias walked into Reno PD headquarters. No lawyer, no entourage, no posturing. Still wearing the founder's cut. The front desk officer looked visibly unsure whether to salute or call backup. Detective Lena Voss met him in interview room 3. Steel table, fluorescent lights, one folder already waiting. She was exactly what the rumors said. Sharp eyes, zero wasted words, the kind of presence that made weak men lie faster. Mr. Mercer. Detective? She gestured to the chair. You're not what I expected. Elias sat. I get that a lot. She opened the folder. Gunshot photo from the clubhouse wall, financial reports, Black Viper surveillance still, anonymous statements. The chapter was officially under scrutiny. Vice President Crow already admitted embezzlement? Former Vice President. That subtle correction made her notice everything. Interesting. Former, she repeated. Elias nodded. We handled internal rank. Voss studied him. And the firearm? Disarmed, no one injured. Her eyebrow lifted. You disarmed an armed biker in under 2 seconds at 72? Elias met her stare. I've had practice. She almost smiled. Almost. Then came the real question. Are the Nevada Desert Hells Angels moving narcotics through Black Viper channels? The room held still. This was the future of the chapter. One lie here could buy months. One truth could buy legitimacy. Elias leaned forward slightly. No. She watched for deception. There was none. But Mason intended to. That answer made her pause. Because full truth was rare, especially in organized biker structures. Elias continued. He's under internal corrective supervision. Money recovery begins tomorrow. You'll receive full treasury access by end of day. Now she was genuinely recalculating him. Most clubs circled ranks, closed walls, threatened witnesses. This founder was opening books. Voss tapped the surveillance photo. Why? Elias answered without hesitation. Because bad men survive in darkness. I'm done leading from shadows. The detective sat back. For the first time, there was something close to respect in her eyes. Maybe not trust, but respect. Outside, the chapter still waited at the hospital parking lot. Engines cooling, hospice runs completed, chemo escorts done. The first day of reconstruction underway. And by nightfall, the founder knew one thing with certainty. The real war for the chapter's future wasn't with rival clubs. It was with everything weak leadership had normalized. And tomorrow, that war would get personal. The desert night over Reno carried a strange kind of stillness. Not peace, the kind of silence that comes right before violence chooses a direction. At 2117, the Nevada Desert Chapter Clubhouse was alive again. Not with music, not with whiskey, with work. Ledgers were open across the oak table. Harlan Pike and Damian Cross were rebuilding treasury structure from the ground up. Dual signatures, verified vendor chains, locked emergency funds. Every loophole Mason had abused was being welded shut in real time. At the far wall, Tyler Boone and 3 younger riders were reorganizing ride schedules around hospital service routes. The culture shift had started fast, exactly how Elias wanted it. Momentum mattered. When a chapter admitted rot, you either rebuild immediately or nostalgia let the poison grow back. Elias stood near the old photo wall, studying a framed shot from 1998. Nevada run, snow in the background, Margaret on the back of his bike, laughing, still alive in silver and memory. Jonah Kane stepped beside him. No one skipped the hospital runs. Elias nodded. Good. Jonah lowered his voice. Tyler stayed an extra hour. That got Elias's attention. For what? Sat with a Vietnam vet who had no visitors. A small thing. The exact kind of thing that determined whether younger riders could be saved from performance culture. Good. Maybe the chapter still had future in it. Then the clubhouse phone rang. Not a cell, the hard line. Old number. Private. Known only to patched members, allied clubs, and a handful of enemies old enough to still respect protocol. Everyone in the room looked up. Elias crossed to the desk and picked up. This is Mercer. A voice answered, male, cold, confident, too calm. You really came back from the grave. Elias recognized the voice instantly. Caleb Rourke, president of the Iron Scorpions MC. Northern Nevada rivals, smaller club, meaner habits, loose fentanyl ties. Never strong enough to start a war while Elias still ruled publicly. Until now. What do you want? Rourke chuckled. Want? Nothing. A beat. Thought you should know one of your boys is having a rough night. Every man nearest the desk stiffened. Elias's voice flattened. Who? Rourke let the silence breathe just long enough to weaponize it. Tyler Boone. The room changed instantly. Tyler was right there, across the table, alive. Then Elias realized. Not Tyler. Tyler's younger brother, Evan Boone. 26. Prospect support mechanic. Not patched. Worked the chapter garage. Lived 2 blocks from Midtown. Rourke continued. Got him outside the shop, still breathing. For now. The room exploded into movement. Tyler was already on his feet, face drained white. "What the hell are you saying?" Elias lifted one hand. Silence. Even panic obeyed him now. "What's the message?" Rourke laughed. "You really are still the same old bastard." Then the line sharpened. "Message is simple. Ghost presidents should stay dead." The call disconnected. Tyler was moving before the receiver fully settled. "I'm going." Elias stepped directly into his path. "No." Tyler's voice cracked. "That's my brother." "And that's exactly why you're not thinking." Tyler's fists clenched. Emotion, tunnel vision, predictable, usable, exactly what the Scorpions wanted. Elias turned to the room. "Garage cameras, now." Damien already had the laptop open, feed pulled instantly. The footage showed Evan locking up the Midtown repair bay at 2051. A black van rolled into frame, no plates, 3 men in dark cuts, scorpion tail insignia on one shoulder, pipe strike, fast grab, vehicle southbound. Professional enough to be practiced, not random street violence. Planned leverage. Tyler slammed his palm against the oak table. "They're baiting us." "Yes," Elias said. "Then we hit them first." "No." That one word stopped the room colder than shouting ever could. Tyler stared at him. "You gonna tell me to stay calm while they got my blood?" Elias held the stare. "I'm going to tell you emotion is exactly how clubs die." The younger riders around Tyler shifted uneasily, because deep down they all wanted immediate retaliation. Engines, pipes, warehouse fire, fast emotional war. But the founder had already seen this movie before, and it always ended in funerals. Jonah stepped beside Damien. "We got 3 likely holding sites." He laid photos on the table. Old tire processing yard, South Industrial. Abandoned drywall warehouse near Sparks. Former Viper's chop shop outside Carson Access Road. Elias studied all 3. No wasted movement, no panic. This was the war he understood best. Pressure without visibility. "Why Evan?" Damien asked. Tyler answered before Elias could. "Because they know they can pull me." Elias looked at him. "Exactly." Then he looked around the room. "This isn't about Evan." Tyler snapped. "It damn well is for me." Elias stepped closer, and when he spoke, his voice dropped into the tone that had kept men alive in worse places than Reno. "No. It's about whether the Scorpions can provoke emotional leadership." Silence. Every younger rider listened now, because this was live doctrine, real-time chapter survival. If we rush blind, they film it. Call Voss. Tie us to assault, unlawful entry, weapons. The entire rebuild dies in one night. Damien nodded. He saw it too. This was bigger than one hostage. It was a test of whether the founder's new structure actually held. Tyler's breathing was ragged, but he was listening. Good. Growth under pressure. Elias pointed to the map. "Rourke called too fast." Jonah caught it immediately. "Meaning?" "He wanted the news controlled." Elias traced a line south from the Midtown shop. "Not warehouse, too obvious." Then another line. "Not the old Viper chop site, too exposed." His finger landed on the tire yard. "Processing tunnels underground. 1 road in, 3 service exits." Damien exhaled. "He wants a siege." "No," Elias said. "He wants panic." That difference mattered, because panic could be manipulated. Discipline could weaponize back. Elias turned to Tyler. "You want your brother back?" Tyler nodded hard. "Then you follow every word I say." No hesitation now. "Yes, President." Good. The chapter moved instantly. No chaos, no shouting. This wasn't Mason's clubhouse anymore. It was Elias's war room again. Teams split fast. Damien took east perimeter. Jonah took rear service exits. Rex and Tommy assembled med extraction. No firearms, only backup locked in saddlebags. Bats, spray, zip restraints. Elias wanted rescue, not headlines. By 22:04, 22 bikes rolled silently through the southern industrial roads. No pipes revving, no show of force, no noise. Predatory quiet. Tyler rode directly behind Elias, every muscle in his body screaming to break formation and tear ahead. But he held line. That alone told Elias the younger man was changing. The tire yard appeared ahead. Rusting fencing, collapsed conveyor belts, stacks of shredded rubber like black graves under moonlight. One floodlight burned near the main office. Too obvious. Trap lighting. Elias killed his engine a block away. The entire formation followed. The silence after 22 engines died felt like the whole city was holding its breath. Jonah crouched beside him. "Scouts confirm 1 inside office, 2 roof, movement underground." Elias nodded. Exactly. Rourke wanted the front door, so Elias would give him something else. He looked at Tyler. "Your brother stays alive only if they think you're stupid." Tyler frowned. "What?" Elias pointed at the floodlit office. "You're going to make them think you are." The realization hit Tyler instantly. Bait the baiters. He nodded. "Loud entry?" "Yes." Tyler's jaw tightened, then steadied. "I can do that." Good. Growth. Elias gave the signal. Tyler mounted up, started his engine alone, and roared toward the front office in a rage performance so convincing half the chapter almost believed it. Floodlights shifted. Roof lookouts turned. Office shadows moved fast. Exactly what Elias wanted. The rest of the chapter moved in darkness toward the lower service tunnel. Damien led the flank. Jonah cut rear exits. Elias entered the underground processing corridor first. The tunnel smelled like oil, dust, and old fire damage. One hanging bulb flickered. Voices ahead. Scorpions. Laughing. A weak groan. Evan. Alive. Elias raised one fist. Hold. Then he stepped forward into the dim chamber. 5 scorpions. 1 chair. 1 hostage. 1 president standing beside him. Caleb Rourke smiled from the shadows. "You really came yourself." Elias's eyes went to Evan, bruised, bloodied, conscious. Good enough. Then he looked at Rourke. "No, I brought the chapter you thought forgot how to think." And above them, Tyler's engine roared like thunder through the trap Rourke no longer controlled. The underground chamber was wide enough to process truck tires and dark enough to bury mistakes. One hanging bulb swung from a frayed wire, throwing broken light across the concrete floor. Evan Boone sat tied to a steel chair near the conveyor wall. His face was split open above the eye, one cheek swollen purple, hands zip-tied behind the chair frame. But he was conscious. Good. Alive meant options. Dead meant war. Caleb Rourke stood beside him with 4 iron scorpions fanned out in the shadows. Pipes, chains, one sawed off tucked into a belt. Rourke's leather cut hung open over a thermal shirt. His scorpion patch cracked from years of cheap victories. He smiled when Elias stepped fully into the light. "You really came." Elias didn't blink. "You called the chapter out?" I answered. Rourke laughed. "No, old man. I called Tyler out. A beat. And instead, I got the ghost." From deeper in the tunnel behind Elias, Damien and Jonah held the flank in total silence. Rex had already moved to the rear support exit. Tommy covered the western corridor. 22 bikes outside, 15 men inside perimeter. Everything set. Rourke just didn't know it yet. Elias took 2 slow steps into the chamber. His boots echoed. Concrete, oil drips, the faint metallic clink of Evan shifting against restraints. Rourke tilted his head. "Thought I'd get the young idiot charging in blind." Elias answered flatly. "That's why you lose." Rourke's smile thinned. "You think you still run Nevada?" Elias's gray eyes swept the chamber. Entry points, support beams, blind spots. 2 men left dominant. 1 nervous on the right. Shotgun carrier overweight. Rourke too confident. Already solved. "This was never about Nevada," Elias said. Rourke frowned. "It's about whether your club survives discipline." That line confused him. Good. Confused men telegraphed violence. Tyler's engine thundered above them from the floodlit office decoy. Shouting erupted through the ventilation shaft. Scorpion roof lookouts had fully committed to the false front breach. Rourke glanced upward for half a second. That was enough. Elias gave the signal. 1 sharp whistle. The chamber exploded. Damien hit first from the left corridor. Baton cracked against the knee of the nearest Scorpion. The man folded, screaming. Jonah drove forward from the rear blind spot, shoulder-checking another biker into the wall, hard enough to crack concrete dust loose from the beam. The third man swung a chain. Elias stepped inside the arc and drove his palm into the biker's throat. Air gone. Chain dropped. Rourke lunged for Evan. Smart, hostage shield. Expected. Elias was already moving. At 72, his body no longer had the speed of youth, but it had something better. Efficiency. He crossed the distance in 3 brutal steps. 1 forearm smashed Rourke's wrist away from Evan's neck. The other hand buried into Rourke's sternum. Hard. Enough to force him backward into the conveyor railing. Metal screamed. The sawed-off carrier tried to raise the shotgun. Tommy Vale emerged from the dark western tunnel and drove a steel baton directly into the man's forearm. Bone cracked. The shotgun clattered across the concrete. Rex kicked it into the drainage trench. No headlines. No firearms. Exactly as ordered. Tyler's roar echoed down the tunnel from above. He was inside the front office now, making enough noise to keep the outer Scorpions convinced the main hit was still topside. Elias cut Evan's restraints with Jonah's folding blade. The younger mechanic nearly fell out of the chair. Tyler's little brother was tougher than he looked. "Can you move?" Evan coughed blood onto the floor. "Yeah." "Good. Move with Rex. No heroics." Rex grabbed him under one arm and moved him toward the rear extraction tunnel. That should have ended it. Fast, clean, surgical. But pride ruins exits. Rourke wiped blood from his mouth and laughed. A low, ugly sound. "You still think this is about the kid?" Elias turned. Rourke reached into his jacket slowly. Not for a weapon, for a phone. He hit the screen. A projector mounted near the conveyor belt flickered on. The wall lit up. Security feed. The clubhouse. Nevada desert. Chapter headquarters. Live. Elias's expression changed for the first time. Just slightly. Rourke grinned through split lips. "While you brought your best riders here." The feed zoomed tighter. 3 black vans outside the clubhouse, black Viper cuts, 6 men entering through the rear service door. I sent the Vipers to your house. The chamber froze. Even Damien's breathing changed. Because the ledgers, the rebuilt treasury, the chapter archives, the founding charters, every financial correction from the last 24 hours, all inside that building. Rourke had never wanted Tyler's brother. He wanted Elias to empty the clubhouse. A 2-stage diversion, old-school war strategy. Actually smart. Elias almost respected it. Almost. Rourke smiled wider. Your rebuild dies tonight. For one long second, every younger rider in the chamber looked toward Elias. This was the test. Panic? Rage? Split response? The exact thing Rourke had built the trap around. Instead, Elias turned to Damien. Calm. Absolute. Protocol Ash. Damien's eyes sharpened instantly. He understood. One of the oldest contingency plans ever written into chapter doctrine, designed after the 1998 cartel war. Nobody under 40 even knew it existed. Jonah was already smiling. Rourke's grin faltered. What the hell is Ash? Elias looked at him. The reason founders survive. At that exact moment, 2 miles north, the Nevada Desert Chapter Clubhouse lights went black. Every bulb, every floodlight, every visible camera. The live feed on Rourke's projector died into static. Then another screen in the chamber flickered to life, this time showing inside the clubhouse. Night vision. Old-school backup surveillance hardwired on an isolated battery loop only the original founders knew about. The Vipers had entered the dark clubhouse and found it empty. Not empty by chance. Empty by design. Protocol Ash had been activated the moment Jonah received Rourke's call. The treasury ledgers, founding charters, cash reserves, even the old photo wall plates, all moved to St. Mary's Hospital archive lockbox under Elias's name. Nothing left to steal, nothing left to burn. The Vipers were now trapped in a dead building on hidden camera. And Reno PD's organized crime unit had already been anonymously tipped to the location by Detective Lena Voss's direct secure line. Rourke's face finally lost all color. Elias stepped closer. You were smart enough to build a diversion, another step, but you forgot who wrote the original playbook. Outside, sirens began to wail in the far distance. Rourke heard them too, realized it. The Vipers were about to get swept. His alliance, his leverage, his poison route, gone. Rage replaced strategy. He charged, straight at Elias. No angle, no weapon, pure emotional violence. Mistake. Elias pivoted, used the bigger man's momentum, hip turn, shoulder trap, concrete slam. Rourke hit the floor so hard the sound cracked through the chamber. Elias planted one boot on his chest. The room had gone silent except for distant police sirens and the slow drip of oil from the old machinery. Rourke stared up at him, gasping. This isn't over. Elias looked down with the same winter calm that had frozen Mason at the gas station. No. A beat. It's just over for you. Damien zip-tied Rourke's wrists. Jonah secured the remaining conscious scorpions. Tyler finally stormed down the front tunnel, face wild, only to find Evan already alive and standing beside Rex. The younger rider froze, then crossed the chamber in 3 strides and wrapped his brother in a crushing embrace. Evan coughed and laughed at the same time. About damn time. Tyler's eyes lifted to Elias. No words. Didn't need any. Respect had finally replaced noise. Real respect, earned through discipline under pressure. Outside, the night was alive with police lights. Scorpions scattered, vipers trapped. The chapter intact. And as Elias stepped out of the underground yard into the cold Nevada air, he knew the next war wouldn't be with rival clubs. It would be with what came after victory. Power, politics, and the younger generation deciding what kind of house they now belong to. By dawn, Reno looked different. Not on the surface. The same desert light still bled gold across warehouse roofs and casino glass. Traffic still crawled along Interstate 80. Coffee shops still open to men pretending they'd slept. But under the city's skin, the power map had shifted. The Iron Scorpions had lost their president. The Black Vipers had been caught inside a dead clubhouse with burglary tools, accelerants, and enough narcotics residue in one van to bury their Nevada pipeline for the next decade. And for the first time in over 30 years, every major independent club in northern Nevada knew one thing. Elias Mercer was no longer a ghost. He was back in the chair. Chapter Clubhouse was packed before sunrise. Not with celebration, with aftermath. That was where real leadership lived. Not in the win, in what followed. The oak table was buried in reports, police scanner transcripts, hospital invoices, security stills from the Viper breach, witness statements, Treasury restructuring drafts. The chapter's future sat in paperwork now, not fists. Damian Cross stood at the head of the financial side, already moving with the rhythm of a true VP. Dual sign-off procedures were locked. Regional charity funds moved to protected veteran trusts. Hospital partnerships formalized. Tyler Boone was on route discipline and member welfare. A younger writer now, yes, but visibly changed. No more performative swagger. Every instruction short, focused, service first. Mason Crow sat farther down the table with a legal pad and a list of every dollar he'd stolen. Handwritten repayment schedule, asset liquidation, bike sale, storage unit, inherited land share. No one asked him for it. He brought it himself. That mattered. Elias stood by the photo wall, coffee in hand, watching the room rebuild itself. This was what he had always wanted the chapter to become. Not feared, but structurally impossible to corrupt. Jonah Kane approached with a file. "Detective Voss?" Elias took it. "Search authorization, limited financial review, voluntary cooperation agreement." Good. Exactly where he wanted law enforcement. Close enough to validate transparency, not close enough to mistake service routes for criminal logistics. "She's smart," Jonah muttered. "She's useful," Elias corrected. Then the clubhouse door opened. Every head turned. Detective Lena Voss stepped inside. No backup, no uniforms. Just a black overcoat, a case file, and the kind of confidence only dangerous honesty creates. Several younger writers stiffened instantly. Old habits. Cops meant walls. Elias raised a hand. The room relaxed. Again, authority through presence. Voss took in the scene. Financial restructuring, no liquor out, daylight meeting, former VP on repayment logs, younger writers handling hospital schedules. This was not what organized crime had profiled. Interesting. "Mr. Mercer." "Detective?" She stepped closer to the oak table. "Rourke's talking." That got everyone's attention. Tyler looked up sharply. Damian stopped writing. Even Mason lifted his head. Voss opened the file. "Scorpions are rolling over fast. Turns out Rourke had fentanyl agreements with 3 feeder crews in Carson, Sparks, and Elko." No surprise. But then came the part that mattered. "He says someone inside your chapter fed them culture intel." The room froze. Not movement. Trust. That line hit trust. Elias didn't react outwardly, but internally, the board rearranged. An internal leak meant the generational split wasn't over. Someone had told Rourke Tyler would react emotionally. Younger riders were hospital-bound. Clubhouse night rotations changed. Founder was active again. That was inside knowledge. Recent knowledge. Dangerous knowledge. Voss slid a printout across the table. Phone metadata. Burner contact routing. One outgoing ping from inside chapter property 36 minutes before Evan's abduction. Jonah's eyes narrowed. Can you trace it? Voss nodded. Single-use prepaid, but tower bounce came from your back garage. The room slowly turned, toward the back wall, toward the garage access corridor, toward Jace Holloway. 29. Newer patched rider, mechanically gifted, quiet. One of Mason's most vocal supporters during the Damien frame-up. Jace's face changed immediately. That tiny involuntary drain of color told Elias everything. Tyler was already halfway out of his chair. You sold out my brother? Elias's voice hit the room before Tyler could move. Sit. Tyler obeyed instantly. Jace backed one step toward the garage hall. Bad move. The room felt it. Damien moved left. Jonah moved right. Rex blocked rear angle. Jace's voice came out too fast. It wasn't supposed to go like that. There it was, confession through panic. Elias walked slowly toward him. Then tell it right. Jace swallowed hard. His eyes darted between Tyler and the detective. Rourke offered me a transfer. Silence. He kept going. Full patch authority in Carson, road captain track in under a year. Mason actually looked disgusted, because even he, at his worst, had stolen internally. This was betrayal through outsourcing. Elias stopped 6 feet away. You sold movement patterns for rank. Jace's voice cracked. I thought Mercer coming back meant war. I thought if the Scorpions won leverage, they'd absorb half our younger riders and I'd move up. That line hit the room harder than the earlier confession, because it exposed the disease Elias had been fighting since part 1. Young riders who saw brotherhood as a career ladder. Tyler's fists clenched white. You fed them my brother. Jace looked at the floor. I didn't know they'd take Evan. Lena Voss spoke calmly. That part's irrelevant under conspiracy. Jace's head snapped toward her. The reality of police presence finally landed. He wasn't facing church discipline. He was facing law. Elias looked at Voss. You taking him? She nodded. If you're done with chapter matters. The room held still. This was another precedent moment. Old MC culture would handle it internally. Disappearances, desert pits, closed loops. But Elias had already chosen the future. Transparent legitimacy over myth. He looked at Jace. You're stripped. Jace shut his eyes. No resistance now. Patch comes off. Damien stepped forward and removed it himself. No violence. No humiliation, just consequence. The cut suddenly looked empty and pathetic in Jace's hands. Voss cuffed him. As she led him toward the door, she paused beside Elias. You're changing the profile. Elias sipped his coffee. Good. After the police car left, the clubhouse stayed silent for a long moment. Every younger rider in the room had just watched the old mythology die another death. No secret burial, no outlaw fantasy. Truth, accountability, removal. Tyler finally spoke. How many more think like him? That was the real question, the one beneath every rebuild. Elias looked around the room, at Mason, at Damien, at Tyler, at the younger prospects now clearly terrified of what ambition without code actually became. "Enough to keep teaching," he said. Then he moved to the head of the table, not as a ghost, not as a myth, as president. "We don't rebuild this house by winning fights." He let the words settle. "We rebuild it by deciding what kind of men are allowed to rise inside it." Every face in the room locked in, because now they understood the true war. Not scorpions, not vipers, not police. Culture. Elias continued. "From today forward, no rider under 5 years patched holds treasury authority. No promotion without service miles. No rank without hospital hours, veteran escorts, and funeral detail." The younger riders absorbed every word. This was no longer biker politics. This was doctrine. The next 30 years written in real time. Damien nodded slowly. Tyler too. Even Mason looked relieved, because structure was what stopped men from becoming versions of themselves they no longer recognized. Outside, the sun rose higher over Reno. Inside, the chapter had survived the night war, the police scrutiny, the hostage crisis, and the internal leak. But Elias knew the hardest part still remained. Not removing the rot, choosing who inherited the code. And tomorrow, that decision would change the entire future of the Nevada Desert chapter. The Nevada sunrise poured molten gold across the clubhouse windows. For the first time in years, the room felt clean. Not quiet, not empty. Clean. The kind of stillness that comes only after a house survives fire and chooses what deserves rebuilding. Every patched rider in the Nevada Desert chapter was present. 30 men now. Jace Holloway's seat remained empty. His missing chair was deliberate. Elias Mercer had ordered no one move it. A reminder. Every house needed memory. The oak table stretched through the center of the room, scarred by decades of fists, whiskey rings, maps, votes, grief, and now rebirth. At the head sat Elias, not hidden, not ghosted, not rumor. The founder in full light. To his right stood Damien Cross, interim vice president no longer in question. To his left, Tyler Boone, no longer the loud young rider from the gas station, but a man visibly hardened by responsibility. Mason Crow stood near the back wall beside Jonah Kane. No rank, no authority, only presence. And somehow that presence mattered more now than it ever had when he wore the VP rocker. Elias let the room settle before speaking. "This chapter survived because enough of you chose correction over ego." No one interrupted. No one shifted. They were listening the way men listen when they finally understand the cost of not listening sooner. Elias continued. "Scorpions are broken. Vipers are under federal pressure. Reno PD closed the club under voluntary cooperation review." A few nods. Everyone already knew the broad version, but hearing it from the founder turned fact into history. "The roads are ours again." A pause, then the real turn. "But roads are easy. Culture isn't." That landed exactly where it needed to. Because every man in the room now understood the story had never really been about rival clubs. It had been about the house itself. Elias stood, slowly, age visible in the movement now. The younger riders noticed it more than ever. Not weakness, time, the unavoidable truth that even legends had mileage. He walked to the old photo wall. 30 years of Nevada Desert chapter history looked back at him, Snow rides, desert funerals, state line runs, veteran escorts, Margaret smiling behind him in faded silver. He touched the frame from 1991, the original 12. 6 dead, 5 too old to ride long, 1 still standing. He turned back to the room. My generation built the walls. Then his eyes moved across the younger riders. Yours decides what lives inside them. The room held its breath, because now they knew what this meeting really was. Not a debrief, a succession. Damien realized it first. President? Elias raised a hand. I came back because the chapter forgot the difference between power and burden. His gaze shifted to Tyler. Some of you learned fast. Then to Damien. Some of you never forgot. Then to Mason. And some of you had to lose everything before you could see straight. Mason lowered his head once. No resentment left, only understanding. Elias walked back to the head of the table, then did the one thing no one expected. He removed the founding president cut. Slowly, carefully. 30 years of history in black leather and stitched law. The room went still enough to hear the old ceiling fan turn. He laid the cut flat on the oak table. Every younger rider stared at it like it was sacred. Because it was. Not the leather, what it represented. Discipline, mercy, structure, service, and the right to make impossible decisions. Elias looked directly at Damien. You are the future of the chair. Damien didn't breathe. The room collectively shifted. This was it, the inheritance. But Elias held up one finger. Not yet. That changed the tension, because true leadership wasn't bestowed through sentiment. It was proven through burden. Elias turned to Tyler. Bring them in. Tyler moved to the steel clubhouse door and opened it. 2 elderly veterans stepped inside, one in a wheelchair, the other on a cane. Behind them came 3 families from St. Mary's, a widow, a chemo patient, a teenage boy whose father's funeral escort the chapter had ridden the previous winter. The younger riders looked confused. Then they understood. Witnesses. Not from club politics, from service. Elias addressed the room. Legacy isn't decided by who the patch fears. He looked toward the veterans. It's decided by who the world trusts. The widow stepped forward first. She looked at Damien, then Tyler, then the room. When my husband died, these men rode ahead of the hearse for 50 miles in snow. Her voice shook. But they never once made it about themselves. The teenage boy spoke next. They stayed after everyone left, helped my mom carry chairs, fixed our truck 2 days later. Then the chemo patient. I'm alive because one of your riders drove me through a blizzard to treatment. The room's younger half visibly changed under those words, because now the code wasn't theoretical. It had external proof, community trust, the only thing that made a chapter worth preserving. Elias nodded once, then looked at Damien. Now tell me why you deserve the chair. No grand speech came. That was why Elias had chosen him. Damien answered simply, I don't deserve it. Silence. Then Damien continued, but I'll carry it. That line hit the room harder than any dramatic promise could have, because leadership was never about worthiness, only willingness to absorb burden. Elias finally smiled, the smallest, hardest-earned smile of the entire story. He lifted the founder's cut, then placed it across Damien's forearms. The room erupted. Boots against wood, fists on table, shouted approval. Not chaos, recognition. A real succession. No politics, no manipulation, no ambition games. Only earned transfer. Tyler stepped forward next. Elias looked at him. "You still got a long road." Tyler nodded. "I know." "Good. Road captain track starts today." Tyler's eyes widened, then steadied. Growth rewarded by discipline. Exactly the system Elias had wanted. Finally, Mason spoke from the wall. "What about you?" The room quieted again, because nobody had actually asked the founder what came after legacy. Elias looked toward the open clubhouse doors. Outside, his old Harley sat in the morning light. The same scarred road king from the gas station. The same machine younger men had laughed at. Now every patched rider in Nevada knew it like a relic. Elias answered honestly. "I ride." A beat. "Same as always." He looked toward Margaret's old photo one final time. Just without hiding. By noon, the chapter rode. Not for war, not for revenge. A full Nevada Desert chapter legacy run. Damien at the front now, founder's cut on his back. Tyler, 2 bikes behind, road captain probation line beginning. Mason in the middle ranks, where humility could keep teaching. Veterans escorted in support vans. Families watching from curbs. People filming, yes, but this time not humiliation. Respect. Elias rode last, exactly where founders belonged. Not leading from ego, watching the house move under its new bones. As the formation crossed the Nevada highway and the desert opened wide under the afternoon sun, Elias looked ahead at the chapter he almost lost. A house rebuilt through correction, a legacy handed forward without myth. And somewhere, in the deep thunder of 30 motorcycles rolling through open country, he could almost hear Margaret's voice again. The engines sound like freedom. This time, he believed it. The road stretched endless. The chapter rode into it. And for the first time in 30 years, the Nevada Desert chapter no longer needed a ghost. It had a future.